What's up, you guys? I'm Natasha from Shepherding Peppers Farm, and today it is time for a freezer meal video. The inspiration for this, we're getting to the point where our freezer is about a fourth of the way full, which means I need to use as much as I can of what I already have remaining in my freezer turned into freezer meals so I can then go forward and restock our freezer with fresh meat and then do another freezer meals video, of course. I'm pulling everything out of the freezer and putting it on the counter that I would like to use or get used up while making these freezer meal videos. It's essentially my way of cleaning out all of the refrigerators and the freezers and just making sure I'm using everything, because I think sometimes we can forget what we have, especially if we use deep freezers and not remember what's on the bottom. All of these recipes are ones that you can go ahead and use for dinner tonight, or you can make these into freezer meals. They freeze absolutely beautifully and they can be used at any point in time because they reheat wonderfully. And then I'm just gonna get to work on slicing up these onions. We're gonna use a lot of onions while we are cooking. And so we're gonna be here for a minute going through the process of slicing this all up. And having a tool like this in the kitchen is actually extremely helpful. So the first thing that we are going to make is barbacoa meat. You just need a really nice chunk of beef. My sister-in-law actually introduced me to this recipe. I am so in love with barbacoa meat. I could eat it every single day. It's absolutely one of my favorites. We put it on tacos and in burritos, and I'll throw it into soups and all sorts of things. I will link the recipes in the description of this video, or if they are all mine, I'll go ahead and I'll write those up for you. Just be aware that oftentimes when I'm cooking, I use the recipes as a guide. I don't stick to the recipes exactly the way that you should. I do not typically use measurements. You can see I'm just going completely psycho over here with the lime juice, which turned out really, really good. This recipe calls for a chipotle pepper and adobo sauce, and I just threw the entire can in there because we like a lot of spice in our house, and a bunch of onions. Put it all into the crock pot, set it on low, added some garlic powder, onion powder, all those really good seasonings, and just let it cook down until I could shred this all up. We added a really nice chunk of cilantro in there too. I had just made beef bone broth. This gelatin looking substance is bone broth that has been chilled and refrigerated so it looks like jelly. This is exceptionally nutritious and really, really good for you. And when you add this in while you're cooking your meals, it just adds nutrients to it. This is it coming out of the crock pot. Does that not look phenomenal? So good. I can't tell you, so good. When I'm going to put things in the freezer like this, add the dressings from the crock pot. That's going to add moisture when you're reheating it. And I typically will reheat things more than once. Knowing that, I want to make sure I have a really solid amount of this liquid to really cushion the meat as it reheats up. All right, now we are going to go ahead and make Mississippi pork roast. If you've had Mississippi pot roast, you know how great Mississippi pot roast is. It's very easy to make. You put your pot roast into your Instapot, add a packet of au jus seasoning and a packet of ranch, and then you throw in a pepperoni and a stick of butter, and this makes an exceptional pot roast. We're doing the same thing with a pork roast, a Boston butt. That is what we have, because I'm trying to use what we have in the freezer. And then I also decided to go ahead and throw in some beef broth with this just to round it out a little bit. Put this in the Instapot, let it cook, drained my seasonings and my juices out so we could go ahead and shred this up. You have to sample things as you work. It's part of the reward of being the chef. You get to try your food, and this turned out to be exceptionally good. We just shredded this up. And then I decided to make some mashed potatoes to go with this as well. Mashed potatoes as a side. You're gonna boil some diced up potatoes. You're gonna put this in your food processor. You're gonna go ahead and add in some garlic powder and some onion powder, some salt. I like to add in about half a tub of the ricotta cheese. This is in place of sour cream or cream cheese. I'll add a few tablespoons worth of milk and just mix it all up. And my kids go crazy for this. They absolutely love it. The only thing I will say about freezing these in these little side containers is that I do have to use my mixer on a stick. What is the name for that? I don't know. It's a stick mixer. I can't remember what they call this at the moment. I need to get some coffee. But once I have reheated these potatoes, I will go ahead and an immersion blender. That's what it is. I'll use an immersion blender and remix this all together, and it makes for really creamy whipped potatoes that are just phenomenal. This is tried and true comfort food, creamy potatoes, to the point that you'll see Sophia sits over there and licks the entire bowl clean. Like, the kids love these. French beef stew cooked this way is so delicious. It is outstanding. It's so good. So you're gonna take your beef, you're gonna cut it into chunks, and then you're gonna season it. You're gonna add in garlic powder, onion powder, Italian seasonings, salt, pepper, paprika, and you're gonna mix it all up, turn it around in the bowl so you can get those flavors absolutely everywhere. I'm gonna put a little bit of olive oil into a pan, and I'm going to sear these on all sides. These came out of the pot being seared, and everybody was trying to get a piece of this, and I was like, guys, stay out of it. It is for the stew. But man, did it look phenomenal. That same pan that has the leftover seasonings and olive oil, the drippings from searing this meat, that's what I'm gonna go ahead and start cooking my stew in. So it's gonna have all those flavors in there. I'm gonna throw a stick of butter in with the drippings, and then I'm gonna add in a giant handful of onions. I don't know how many onions this equated to, but it was a lot. I'm also adding in a lot of garlic. You can adjust this so it's not so crazy. And again, I'll link the recipe that I used for this video. Just be aware that I kind of went rogue with it. And then we added in a couple of tablespoons of balsamic vinegar. Landon needed his up time, my sweet boy. I was out of tomato paste, which the recipe calls for, so I had to make homemade tomato paste with the skins of our tomatoes. So that's what's in this little Ninja food processor. And I like to add in a packet of au jus seasoning just to round out the flavors for everything, as well as some beef broth and about a cup of flour. It's pretty much a roux plus. That's what we'll call it, a roux plus. I'm gonna thicken it up with another 3/4 a cup of flour, and it's almost gonna form a paste. That's kind of what we're gonna be getting at here. Then I'm gonna start pouring my beef broth into this. This is homemade canned beef broth, but you can obviously use store-bought. We're gonna mix this all together, and it's gonna kind of form the base of our stew here. After that, I'm going to add our meat back into the pot. I'm gonna add potatoes, and I'm gonna cover this, and I'm gonna let this cook for several hours on low and just really work together into this heavenly, delicious amazingness. I want to cook it long enough that the meat is fully cooked through and all falling apart. The potatoes are really tender and it's just all really worked together. Now the same beef stew is fully cooked at this point, ready to eat, wonderful. You can go ahead and you can freeze this, but you can also put this into canning jars. And you can pressure can this and have a shelf-stable meal that all you have to do is pull out of the pantry and you have something that's ready to go and can be there to feed your family. Up next, we have pork carnitas, which are so good. So you really just need a pork shoulder here and an Instapot. That'll do the trick. You need some salt and pepper. We are adding in some onions and our lime juice. I actually ran out of lime juice. I used the rest of it in this. I'm gonna add some olive oil to a pan. I'm gonna cut this pork shoulder into some chunks. That way I can sear it on multiple different pieces inside since this is a pretty big chunk of meat. I'm gonna add in pepper, onion powder, garlic powder, Italian seasoning, cumin, and I'm going to add in some oregano. And then I'm gonna rub this all over the meat. I'm gonna go ahead and cook this on the different sides really quickly on some medium to high heat with some oil, and then I'm going to put this into my Instapot to cook. And then I'm also gonna add in the inside of an orange and a cup of chicken broth. I'm gonna put my meat inside this wonderful mixture in the Instapot, and I'm going to cook this down together. This is gonna cook, I don't know, for probably about 70 minutes again. I'm going to take it out once it's all cooked and shred this up, put this into the freezer, and then we can pull this out and have some really, really awesome comfort food at the drop of a hat. Again, I like to add in a good amount of the drippings to these pans when I'm planning on putting them in the freezer. A lot of these recipes, they call for chicken broth and shredded chicken, and I like to just have shredded chicken on hand in the refrigerator. So I am taking a package of chicken here. It's still kind of partially frozen, but that's okay. I'm going to fill my crock pot completely with water because all of this will turn into chicken broth that I can use in the rest of these recipes, and it's gonna make chicken completely fall apart and be wonderful and really, really, really great. Sometimes I like to get a little whimsical with dinner, and I will make things like spinach artichoke stuffed pull-apart bread. Between the carbs and the cream cheese, it's pretty filling as a meal. And then you have the artichokes in there, and then I used shredded up kale for this because I didn't have any spinach. works great as a substitute. This is just a really good, easy dinner, and you can put some fruit and some extra vegetables out on the table, and it just kind of mixes it up. It also freezes pretty well too. The way that we're gonna do this is we are going to take a packet of cream cheese and a thing of ricotta. I'm going to put this in my food processor with some onion powder, garlic powder, and delicious crunchy bacon right out of the oven. Add in a spoonful of sour cream. I feel like it just kind of rounds out all the different flavors. A whole bunch of artichokes that I've roughly chopped already, and a really good handful of this kale. I'm gonna mix this all together, and about half of this mixture is gonna go ahead and get used in the making of the pull apart spinach artichoke bread, and the other half is going to get eaten by everybody because everybody will snack on spinach artichoke dip in the house. The next thing we're going to be making is red beans and rice. This is super simple. I am going to take the ham bones that I have in the freezer. So anytime we make ham for holidays, or if we're ever just in the mood for ham for dinner one night, I will save the bones and a good amount of the meat that's still on the bones. I don't worry about stripping them super clean because of the fact that I know I'll probably end up making red beans and rice. This is also 3 or 4 ham bones that I've had. And I'm going to add some Cajun seasoning, salt, pepper, onion powder and garlic powder, and the ham into my Instapot. I'm gonna add a couple cups of water, and I'm gonna cook this for about an hour. Let all the meat fall off the bones. Enough water to completely cover this because that water is going to be what I use when I make the beans. Once this is all cooked, I'm gonna go ahead and strain this. This is the meat right here. It's very tender. It's falling apart. I am picking off the pieces of fat that are decently sized. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take this ham and toast it in the oven really quick. It almost makes it like bacon. It turns this ham into something just spectacular. Then we're going to add in our beans, a cup of dried red beans to 3 cups of your liquid, and you go ahead and put this into your Instapot. You're gonna let this cook on high for about 25 minutes. You want this to be tender, but not super soft like you're ready to eat it, because you again will be recooking this in the future. So you don't want it all the way cooked through. And then once we get our beans cooked, we get our Instapot rinsed out, we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna make our rice. A cup of rinsed off white rice or brown rice to about 1.3 cups of water is what I will typically use in my Instapot. There's a rice button on mine. I don't know exactly how long it is. You can see there's still liquid from the red beans in there. I have my rice. I'm gonna mix this all together. Everybody in my house loves red beans and rice this way. My oldest does not like beans, was very hesitant to try it. And when she tried it, she was like, okay, this is one of my favorite things to eat. This is absolutely delicious. This is the way I've always made red beans and rice. It's the way our family enjoys it, and it tastes exceptional. It's March, so I need to use up the rest of my squash. It's time. The squash has made it throughout the winter and been exceptional and delicious and great, but it's time to use up the rest of it. The way that we're going to do that is through making butternut squash soup and creamy butternut squash mac and cheese, which is exceptional. It tastes like something that you would get from a nice restaurant. It's really, really good. When I first started making butternut squash mac and cheese, I was like, this is weird. This is going to be weird, but it's just absolutely delicious. And both of these recipes pretty much start off the same way. You're gonna go ahead and peel and cube your butternut squash. Once that's done, you're gonna take some olive oil, you're gonna heat it up in your pan, add in your onions and your garlic, a little bit of sea salt and some pepper. To my butternut squash soup, I'm going to add in about 4 cups of chicken broth. You can use vegetable broth. I have chicken broth because that's what I made. And then I'm going to add in about 3 pounds worth of the chopped up butternut. I'm going to mix it up, put a lid on it, and I'm gonna let it cook down into mush. After it has cooked down, I'm going to add in about 1/2 cup of Parmesan cheese, about 1/2 cup of ricotta cheese. I'm going to add in a little bit of onion powder and some garlic powder. I'm gonna puree this all together with about 1 cup of milk, and this is just so tasty. This was so good. Now I've seen a lot of recipes that call for fresh ginger in your butternut squash soup, where I'm not a big fan of that. I like it more cheesy and savory. So this was very, very good. Now with my creamy butternut squash mac and cheese, I'm gonna take about 1.5 cups of vegetable broth or chicken broth, and I'm going to put this in the pan and add in the butternut squash, and I'm gonna let this cook down. I'm also going to add in 1.5 cups of milk with some salt and pepper using an immersion blender. I'm also gonna go ahead and boil my pasta on the side in a different pan, so that way it's all cooked and ready to go. We're gonna work in about 2 cups of sharp cheddar cheese to this, and there you have your cheese sauce. Now, one thing that I like to do that the recipe doesn't mention is I like to add nutritional yeast to this. It really rounds out the flavor and gives it a really good cheddar cheese flavor. So I'm gonna add in a couple of tablespoons worth of nutritional yeast. This is gonna have some really good fiber to it. It's just really a great thing to add in when you're making cheese dishes that often aren't traditional with just cheese and milk. And then I'm just gonna go ahead and pour this mixture over my pasta. Holy smokes, this is so good. It's so good. It tastes so good. I wanna make this again now that I'm watching it back and doing the part of the video where I talk, but alas, I will have to wait until we grow more butternut. Continuing this circuit of cleaning out the freezer in the pantry, I have an abundance of sweet potatoes. The sweet potatoes really need to get used at this point. We've been munching on them all throughout the rest of winter and earlier this fall when we harvested them, and we love sweet potatoes in this house. Sweet potatoes are great. They're so good. Well, if you haven't tried secretly putting sweet potatoes into your chili, this is something that I highly, highly recommend. It's a great way to add extra vegetables to your meals, especially if you have children who sometimes can be somewhat picky. My 3-year-old, sometimes I can get him to eat sweet potato fries. It really just depends on his mood, but he loves chili, and putting sweet potatoes in the base of my chili kills 2 birds with 1 stone. I can use up my sweet potatoes and enjoy them, and get my toddler to eat them. The way that we're gonna do this is we're gonna start by just peeling our sweet potatoes, removing the skin from them, and chopping them into roughly an inch size pieces. You don't have to get real fancy with this because your crockpot is going to do a lot of work for you. After you have peeled these and diced them up, you're going to put these into your crockpot. I'm going to add in enough chicken broth to cover these sweet potatoes completely. And then I'm going to add in about 1.5 cups to 2 cups worth of chopped up onions. And then I'm going to put the lid on this and I'm going to let this cook down. After this is cooked on high for an hour, I'm going to test this by using tongs and just seeing if it mashes up really nicely. And if it does, I know that we're ready to continue on to the next step. Then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add into this a whole mess worth of chopped up garlic, several tablespoons worth of our taco seasonings. I'm going to add in a tiny bit of Italian seasonings, some cumin, onion powder, garlic powder, and 2 of our pints of homegrown tomatoes. You can see me straining those, putting them in. I'm gonna give that a solid mix with the immersion blender just because I'm not a big fan of cooked tomato chunks in my chili. So I'm gonna mix that all up. I'm gonna throw into there some frozen green bell peppers from the garden from this last summer, some taco meat, and a can of corn. Let this all cook together and mix up. And a cup of beans. After this is cooked for a while, I like to come through and just sprinkle on the top a little bit more taco seasoning just to round everything out, and then this is good. This can either be canned, you can freeze it. This is exceptionally good. All of the kids love this version of chili. They love traditional chili as well, but a taco chili that has a really thick, delicious consistency, they're a big fan of that too. So if you haven't tried this, this is a phenomenal way to get some extra vegetables into your chili. It's very, very healthy chili, but very, very flavorful chili. It's wonderful.
Very good.
Next, we have an orange honey glazed fish. We're using cod because that's what I have in the freezer. My preference is salmon. That's kind of what I grew up eating in Washington was salmon, so I always lean to that. Seth really likes whitefish though, and so we have cod in the freezer, and that's what we're using for this. So I'm gonna take some butter and I'm gonna melt it down, and then I am going to add in about 1 cup of fresh orange juice. And by fresh orange juice, I just mean I just freshly made this orange juice from frozen orange juice. And that way the kids can enjoy the orange juice and I can use it in the recipe. It's a 2 birds, 1 stone sort of deal. I'm gonna add in about 3 tablespoons worth of honey and 2 tablespoons of soy sauce. This is going to create our honey orange marinade. And then all we have to do once this is made is put our fish in the bottom of the tray pan, let our marinade cool enough to be able to pour it over the fish without any sort of issues. Pour that over the top, and then I'm gonna place a whole layer of foil on the top of this, and I'm going to put broccoli in there. Now this is broccoli that has been slightly roasted before, so it's not gonna need a super long time in the oven. So I can throw this whole tin of fish and broccoli into my oven and cook it all at the same time, and it'll all come out together because this broccoli has already been cooked for like 20 minutes in the past. So this is a 1-pan sort of meal, and it's really, really good. Shrimp scampi is one of my husband's favorite meals. I am taking my homemade spaghetti. I have broken it into little pieces because it's easier for the kids. That way I don't have to go through the process of cutting it up after it's cooked. I just kind of break it a little bit and then I can put it in the pot and boil it. This time I had just stored the spaghetti in a Ziploc bag. Sometimes I'll store it in glass containers. It just really depends on what type of pasta it is. I'm gonna cook the spaghetti noodles. They'll be done and ready to go into a tin foil pan. While that's cooking, I'm going to start on the actual ingredients for the shrimp scampi. I'm going to take some olive oil and I'm going to heat that in a pan and add in about a whole white onion, a couple of tablespoons worth of our garlic. After that's all kind of sauteed together, I'm going to go ahead, add in about a half a stick worth of butter, and then I'm going to throw in about a half a teaspoon of red pepper flakes and some parsley from the pantry. Give that a nice little mix together, and then I'm gonna add in about a half a cup worth of cooking wine. After that's cooked together for about 10 minutes on the stove, I'm gonna add a cup of Parmesan cheese to this and mix it all up. And then we're gonna add our shrimp right in on top of that. Cook that for just a couple of minutes on the stove, kind of a flash cooking sort of thing. And then it's done. The whole mixture can be poured right over the spaghetti noodles and it can go in the freezer to be reheated later for dinner. This is my cheat when I have run out of ideas or we're getting towards the end of the day and I'm kind of tired, is Cajun fish, Cajun cod in this circumstance. I have a whole mix of Cajun seasoning and I'm gonna put it on a plate. Because it's got this really good Cajun heat to it, I do add a couple of tablespoons worth of sugar to this just to kind of balance that heat out so it's not too overwhelming, and it's just fabulous. And I'm gonna take my fish and I'm going to tap it into my Cajun mix on both sides, and voila, we have Cajun-spiced fish that can go into the freezer for dinner. This is probably one of the easiest meals that you could possibly make in the entire world. It takes like 5 seconds. It almost feels wrong calling this a freezer meal because it's so easy. Pesto chicken pasta. I love pesto chicken pasta. It's so good. So we have our shredded chicken, and what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take a whole bunch of onions. I'm going to put this in the pot. I'm going to add some olive oil to it and a little bit of garlic, and I'm going to cook this down, saute it all together. And then I have these 16-ounce tubs of pesto from the freezer. I'm going to take one of these out. I'm going to put all the pesto into the same pot after the onions and the garlic has been sauteed together. And I'm going to place this back on the stove on low because this pesto has been frozen. I want it to kind of work together with the olive oil, soften up, and become a sauce. We decided to have some of this for dinner tonight, otherwise I would have mixed it in a oil pan. So you can see I'm pouring the sauce in. It mixed really well with the olive oil, the pesto did, and it just kind of turned into this creamy deliciousness. And I'm going to take spaghetti noodles and I'm going to add this to the pan, mix it all up, and voila. All we have to do is add some shredded chicken on the top of this and we are good to go. Fajita chicken tacos. This feels very similar to the Cajun sweet and spicy fish because it's so easy to make that it almost feels like I'm cheating and doing something wrong. So I'm taking about a cup of water and I'm putting it in a bowl. I'm also going to add just a squeeze of lemon juice to this too to round out the flavors. And then I'm pulling out our homemade taco sauce. This is our mild version of homemade taco sauce, and I think these are 16-ounce containers, and I'm just pouring the remainder of that into here, and I'm going to mix this together, and then I'm going to take my chicken and I'm going to put the chicken into a bag, put this watery taco sauce mixture over the top of the chicken. I'm going to throw into here some onions and some green peppers. Once this is all done and mixed together, I'm going to pop this into the freezer, and as this freezes and hardens, it is going to start the marinating process. And once you take this bag out of the freezer and you start heating it all together, it's going to finish marinating it and cooking it all together at the same time. And then all I have to do is grab out taco fixings. I have to grab out tortillas and some lettuce, and voila, there I have it, fajita chicken tacos. It's so easy, it's so simple. Again, I feel like I'm cheating. I feel like I'm doing something wrong here. And there you have it, guys. That is going to wrap up this freezer meal video. These are some really easy recipes that you can go ahead and cook tonight for dinner, or you can pop them into your freezer and pull them out and they reheat beautifully. I will see you guys in the next one. Bye, y'all.